Behind the Shades.
What, in general, is childhood trauma?
Childhood trauma are experiences that have altered how you see the world, how you perceive the world. And we're actually going to go a little bit more deeper into childhood trauma and speak on complex childhood trauma. So it's that continuous traumatic experience, traumatic event that you've gone through that ultimately has shifted how you view the world. So for someone that has complex PTSD per se, their mind isn't typically wired the way that, say, a secure person with someone without it is wired. We're wired naturally for connection, but someone that has complex PTSD is ultimately just trying to be safe. So anything they need to do to stay safe, the mind is going to work towards that. So for them, and myself included, you are wired ultimately to protect yourself. It's almost like survival mode. And ultimately, that can keep you stuck from actually living the life that you want.
So when you say complex childhood trauma, is that specific to, well, let me rephrase that. When you say complex childhood trauma, what does that exactly mean for someone who maybe, let's say like me, who doesn't have that, who's not as experienced in it as maybe you are?
Okay, so if I was explaining it to a 7-year-old?
Absolutely. I'm the 7-year-old.
So you are in an experience, say you're walking down the street and something happens and your first thought is, I feel bad, or this doesn't make me feel good. It's connected to your feelings. It's not necessarily a thought. It's how does that make me feel? And what is it that I am, or how am I perceiving this event and what meaning I'm giving to that? Because with trauma, it's not necessarily the event itself, it's how and what meaning we're giving to that event to be about us ultimately. So you're walking down the street, someone looks at you a certain way, you'll think, okay, well, that doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me feel good. So that hurts. And it hurts because something is wrong with me. And if something is wrong with me, I'm bad. It's just, you see how you go down to that storyline and just the interpretation that you've given to something so simple. And it may not have anything to do with you, but you make it mean something about you ultimately.
So does that mean that sometimes, since you mentioned it's a situation that we can perceive and then it's how we feel, is there some of us that maybe will perceive as a situation as impacting us negatively, but it's not necessarily so?
It is possible. It's entirely possible because a lot of us perceive things based on a past experience. And it's something that we, yes, have control over, but ultimately your mind is wired to protect you. It's wired to move towards what is familiar. So if you're in a situation that reminds you of something that happened in the past, it's going to bring that situation up to be like, okay, remember the last time this happened, this was the outcome. So you're automatically just on alert to thinking that that's the outcome, when in reality, what is happening in front of you may not have anything to do with that memory.
Because I think I was in a situation like that because as an adult, there's some things that would bother me.
Yeah.
And I had a difficult time trying to figure out why, because it seemed so simple in nature.
Yeah.
But then when I started to remember, or I asked, I was like, hey, this is what has happened to me in this childhood. It's like when an example would be when I watch a movie and I see scenes of people being bullied or attacked, and the person who's going through that, that they're defenseless, but people still will pick on them. Yeah. It made me remember a time where I saw that at a young age. I saw that in front of me and I felt powerless to help. So that's my understanding of it. Is that accurate?
It is very accurate. It brings you back to an experience you've had, you being a part of the experience. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an experience that was happening to you, but you could have seen it, you could have been perceiving it. Just like a child that experiences their parent being abused. They're a part of that experience. And why that's the case is because as a child, the world is an extension of you. This is your world. So anything that's happening around you in your mind is because of you. So you attach a personal meaning, a personal interpretation of what's happening outside of you and how you're feeling as what it means and that's what is actually happening, when that's not necessarily true.
And how do you help others deal with that? Because as an adult, I don't know if I want to go back and revisit my childhood, especially if it's one where there's trauma there that I'm kind of like, okay, let me put it in the closet with the rest of my kid toys. And maybe one day when I'm old and gray, I'll look at it. Like, how do you help us deal with that?
To be honest with you, you're not helping yourself if you don't, is how I look at it. And let me give you some context. Without knowing what's happening or what happened back then, you're really honestly keeping yourself stuck, because whether you like it or not, it's going to show up in how you respond in relationship, in how you respond at work, just your daily interactions. It's going to show up. So I think it would be beneficial, and I feel wholeheartedly that it would be more beneficial to you to know what's causing that. And I get it, to go and observe that, because I see it as you observing it. You're not necessarily reliving it. You're really just watching it like it's a Netflix series. You know, yes, the feelings come up, but now you're no longer that, say, 7-year-old. You're now the 30-year-old who has the tools and isn't powerless, versus that 7-year-old who was, right? And their whole livelihood depending on that caregiver protecting them, loving them, keeping them safe. Unfortunately, that may have not happened, but you, the 30-year-old today, knows how to do those things for yourself. So you really would just be reviewing it versus reliving it. And even if you were to relive it, you now have the tools, hopefully.
Hopefully, right? Hopefully, because that could bring, because you're putting, like, I'm looking at was you and I, right? We look similarly, probably similar background. It's not talked about much in our culture, right? Or in our community. And if it is, it could be interpreted as our parents weren't good parents, and that's not necessarily so. It could be that maybe the parents didn't have the tools to help their children because they weren't provided with those tools themselves. And then we hear about the generational trauma, things of that nature. So when we are looking to help people, and when other people are looking to help people, where do we necessarily start if we're going to start if we're not going to start within ourselves, because we just may not know, right? Like, where should we start? Is it as simple as just saying that, as you mentioned, it's better to do something than not to do something, and then go from there? Or is it more like an outward in approach versus an inward out approach?
Okay, this one is a little bit of a challenge for me, and it's only a challenge for me because I am not like everybody else. You're not like everybody else. So I can't necessarily tell anybody how to do it for themselves, but it's, for me, I recognize that I didn't like feeling powerless. I didn't like just existing. And I was like, I cannot give my power back to anybody else. I need to start holding on to my power and figuring out why I keep attracting the same people, why I keep attracting the same experiences. I'm clearly the common denominator. So there has to be something going on in me, right? Things are happening with everybody else and they don't have the tools, and that's their responsibility. And I have this saying where it's not your fault that you experience the things that you experience, but now the 30-year-old, it's your responsibility. If it's not serving you, then it's time to do something different. But if it's serving you, then stay where you are. And chances are it is not serving you. So it's just time to do something about it. And that can start with just owning your stuff. Because a lot of us know some of the things that we do, the behaviors that we have are unacceptable. And in just saying that, okay, I know this isn't okay, what can I do to make it different is the next step.
That takes courage. That takes a whole bunch of courage to say that, because for you to say that I'm the common denominator, I don't even think most people will say it's me.
We're not taught to do that. We're not taught to do that. We're not taught to be, oh, it's me, it's always, but you don't realize when you're pointing the finger at another person, you're pointing 3 fingers right back at you. So you keep attracting that unavailable man because maybe you're unavailable. You are not setting boundaries. You're not expressing your needs. Like there are things that you're clearly not doing. And like you said, it really does take courage to see that, okay, so I'm the one that's doing this, and actually owning that and stepping into it, not knowing what's on the other side, because what we know is what we've always been doing. And there's a safety element in knowing what you already know, whether it's healthy or not. And then there's this unsafe element in not knowing what could be on the other side. But for me, it was like, this right here, it can't get any worse than this. So it's time to go on the other side.